My name is Vorrak 8, Senior Cultural Analyst for the Galactic Preservation Council, and I am writing this report under protest. Not because anyone is forcing me to write it. No, I am writing it under protest because what I am about to describe should, by all rights of scientific dignity, never have happened to someone of my credentials. I have 14 academic titles, I have studied 47 civilizations, I have eaten, consumed, or absorbed the nutrients of over 200 alien species' primary food sources, and I have never lost my composure in a field assignment. Until the humans, until the food. Let me set the scene properly, because context matters enormously here, and also because my colleague Plivv keeps insisting I am exaggerating, and I want a thorough record that proves beyond all doubt that I am absolutely not. The year was Galactic Standard Cycle 4402. The location was a human settlement on the third planet of a rather unremarkable star system they call Sol. The humans themselves had by this point been aware of galactic civilization for approximately 11 of their years. They had handled this revelation with characteristic human energy, which is to say they had alternated between screaming, asking questions, screaming while asking questions, and then somehow pivoting to offering us coffee. We had declined the coffee at first, standard protocol. Unknown substances require chemical analysis before ingestion. The humans had nodded politely at this, and then proceeded to drink their coffee in front of us with expressions so deeply satisfied that 3 of my team members had filed individual requests to run preliminary sensory assessments on the substance within the week. I had denied all 3 requests. I was at the time very professional. That brings us to the mission. The council had assigned me to lead a cultural nutrition study, which sounds very official, and is in fact exactly as ridiculous as it sounds. Essentially, our job was to determine whether human food posed any significant cultural or biological risks to other galactic species who might, through diplomatic exchange or simple curiosity, come into contact with it. It was supposed to be a 3-week study, a formality. We would catalogue, test, document, and leave. The human assigned to assist us was a chef named Mira Osei. Now, I want to describe Mira Osei carefully, because she is in my professional estimation either the most dangerous individual I have ever encountered, or the most accidentally catastrophic force of nature in recorded galactic history. Possibly both. Mira was a short human female with a round face that seemed to default to a state of mischievous amusement, as though she knew something you did not, and was waiting, very patiently, for you to find out. She wore her hair pulled back when she cooked, tied with a bright orange cloth she called a head wrap. Her hands moved when she cooked the way some species' hands move when they pray, except that Mira's movements produced results that were, shall we say, considerably more immediate than most prayers. She greeted our team with what humans call a big smile, and immediately asked if any of us had dietary restrictions. My colleague Plivv, who is 6 limbs and very little common sense, immediately said, "We eat everything." I tried to correct this. I said, "We are here to observe and document, not to consume." Mira looked at me with those patient human eyes and said, "You can do both." I should have left then. I know that now. We set up our equipment in the observation area adjacent to Mira's kitchen, which humans apparently call a restaurant. The place was called Osei's Table, and it was located on a narrow human street, with trees growing out of square holes in the ground, which is either urban planning or a cry for help, and I honestly cannot decide which. The inside smelled. I lack appropriate terminology here. The Council's official scent classification database has approximately 40,000 entries. None of them adequately described what hit my olfactory receptors when I walked through that door. It smelled like warmth, which is not a smell. I am aware of this. I have a doctorate in sensory biology, and I am telling you it smelled like warmth, and I will defend this characterization under oath. My team set up sensors. We calibrated equipment. We did everything correctly and professionally, right up until the moment Mira walked out of the kitchen, carrying a small tray with several tiny cups on it, and said, "Before we start, let me introduce you all to something." "What is this?" I asked, peering at the cups. "Jollof rice," she said, "just a small taste. Consider it an orientation." I was about to decline on behalf of the entire team. The words were forming. And then Plivv, who I swear has a self-destructive instinct coded into his biology somewhere, reached out, picked up one of the small spoons provided, and ate some. The silence that followed lasted approximately 3 seconds. Then Plivv made a sound that I can only describe as a low, sustained note of pure astonishment. the kind of sound that beings make when they have just witnessed something that rearranges their understanding of the universe. He put the spoon down very slowly. He looked at Mira. He looked at the rice. He looked back at Mira. He looked at the rice. "What?" he said, with extraordinary calm. "Did you put in this?" Mira smiled. "Tomatoes, peppers, onion, spices, rice. That is not possible," Plivv said. "Those are individual ingredients. This is..." He paused, searched, failed to find words. "This is a complete argument." I looked at him. "It is a what?" "A complete argument," Plivv repeated, with the conviction of a man who has seen something and cannot unsee it. "It argues with itself and also wins. There is heat, and there is something underneath the heat, and there is something underneath that which I believe is the actual reason the heat exists, and I cannot separate them." I was going to tell him he was being dramatic. I was going to write this off as Plivv being Plivv, which is a phenomenon our team is very familiar with, and document it as an outlier response. Then Mira looked at me, raised an eyebrow, and pushed a cup toward me. I ate the rice. I will not describe what happened in precise detail, because the full sensory account is classified, and also because it is embarrassing. What I will say is that the heat arrived first. Not violent heat, not the kind that signals danger, but the kind that says, very clearly, pay attention. And then underneath the heat, exactly as Plivv had described, there were layers, actual, distinct sequential layers of flavor, as though each ingredient had its own opinion, and they had all decided to speak at once, and somehow, impossibly, the result was not noise but harmony. I set my spoon down. I looked at Mara. I said, very carefully, "We are going to need to recalibrate our equipment." She nodded, completely unsurprised. "I figured," she said. "Should I start with the next dish?" The next dish was something called suya, which Mira explained was spiced meat grilled over open flame. I noted the preparation method. I noted the spice composition. I noted that when the smell reached my senses, two of my team members literally stopped their conversations mid-sentence, turned and stared at the kitchen with expressions my species reserves for cosmic events. We ate the suya. Our senior data analyst, a being named Torquul, who has approximately the emotional responsiveness of a very old rock, sat in complete silence for 20 seconds afterward, and then said, "I need to send a message to my family." "Why?" I asked. "Because they should know," Torquul said, "that this exists. They should know before they die that something like this is possible." We had been in the restaurant for 40 minutes. I filed an immediate amendment to our mission timeline. 3 weeks, I noted in the report, may not be sufficient. The council replied asking for clarification. I replied that I was gathering data. The council replied asking what kind of data required an amendment this early in the mission. I started to answer, and then Mira appeared from the kitchen, with something wrapped in a large, round, flat bread she called a wrap, and the entire team's attention shifted with the collective focus of prey animals who have just heard a predator move in the dark. Except in this case, the predator was apparently made of seasoned chicken and a sauce that Mira called peanut-based, as though those words were normal and not an announcement that physics had changed. I ate the wrap. I stopped writing the report for approximately 7 minutes. "Vorrak?" Plivv said to me, at some point during minute 4 of my silence. "Yes," I said. "Are we in trouble?" I thought about it. I thought about the layers. I thought about the heat and what was underneath the heat. I thought about Torquul composing a letter to his family. I thought about the fact that I, a 14-title academic with a career built on professional detachment, had just lost 7 minutes to something made from a groundnut. "Yes," I said. Plivv nodded slowly. "The mission parameters," I continued, "are insufficient. We came here to determine whether human food poses a cultural risk to other species." "And?" Plivv prompted. I picked up my official council datapad and began typing the preliminary assessment. "And," I said, "I believe we already have our answer." Mira came back out of the kitchen carrying something that produced a smell so immediately, catastrophically compelling, that even the ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to pause, as though the universe itself was taking a moment to acknowledge what was happening. She set the dish on the table. She called it pepper soup. She explained it was good for the soul, which is a human phrase I had previously considered to be metaphorical. I looked at the pepper soup. I looked at Mira. I typed into the official council preliminary assessment report the following words. "Human food is not a cultural risk. Human food is a cultural certainty. Any species that encounters it will be affected. This is not speculation. This is immediate empirical observation confirmed by a team of 7 trained analysts, 6 of whom are currently unable to complete their standard documentation protocols due to preoccupation with a dish called pepper soup. Mira read this over my shoulder. She laughed, loud and genuine, the way humans laugh when something is exactly as funny as they expected it to be. "You haven't even tried the dessert yet," she said. Torquul looked up from his family letter. Plivv set down his sensor equipment. I closed my eyes, and then I opened them, because I am a professional, and I picked up my spoon and I thought, with the calm resignation of someone who already knows what is about to happen, the council is not going to believe this report. The dessert was called chin chin. I want to be very clear about something before I continue. I am not a being who uses the word dangerous lightly. In my career, I have documented species that communicate exclusively through weaponized sound frequencies. I have catalogued planets with atmospheres made of reactive compounds. I have filed reports on biological entities that can dissolve steel with their saliva. I know what dangerous looks like. Chin chin is small. It is golden. It is fried dough cut into tiny pieces, lightly sweetened, and it crunches when you eat it with a sound that is, somehow, deeply satisfying in a way that has no scientific justification whatsoever. Mira put a bowl of it on the table, casual as anything, as though she were not committing an act of complete psychological warfare. Plivv ate one piece. Then he ate another. Then he picked up the bowl, looked at me with the expression of a being who has fully accepted his fate, and said, "I am going to finish this. I want you to know that I know I am going to finish this, and I have decided that I am at peace with that." He finished the bowl. Torquul had abandoned the letter to his family, and was now in direct violation of field protocol, asking Mira for the recipe, not for documentation purposes. For himself, Torquul, who has eaten the nutrient paste that our species literally calls sufficient, who has never once in 11 years of working together expressed any preference for any food over any other food, was leaning across the table asking a human chef how to recreate fried dough. The rest of my team had, collectively and without any coordination, stopped pretending to work. I sat in the middle of all of this and typed my report with the quiet intensity of a being who is fully aware that the document they are writing will either end their career or define it. The preliminary assessment had already gone through. The council had responded with what I can only describe as politely alarmed confusion. The exact message read, "Analyst Vorrak 8, please confirm your preliminary assessment was submitted intentionally and not as a result of equipment malfunction." I confirmed it was intentional. The council requested clarification. I sent them the sensory data from our equipment, the biological response readings from my team, and a note that said, "I recommend sending a follow-up team. I also recommend that team eat before they arrive, because if they arrive hungry, we will lose them immediately." The council did not find this note helpful. The council sent a follow-up team anyway. Their names were Gabro, Sif, and a very serious elder analyst named Councilor Dren, who arrived 3 days later wearing the expression of someone who had been sent to correct a situation and was entirely confident in their ability to do so. Councilor Dren had 42 academic titles, which is 28 more than me, and she announced upon arrival that she had reviewed our data, found it emotionally compromised, and intended to conduct a clean, objective assessment. Mira greeted them at the door with that smile. I watched Councilor Dren's expression flicker for just a moment when the smell of the kitchen reached her. It was subtle, a very slight pause in her stride, a barely perceptible dilation of her sensory receptors. She covered it quickly. She was a professional. We sat down. Mira brought out the food. She started with something called Egusi soup, which is a thick, rich preparation involving ground melon seeds, leafy greens, and a depth of flavor that my senses categorized under complex, layered, recursive, and then embarrassingly unresolvable, because our equipment literally could not finish passing it before Mira had moved on to the next component. The soup was served with something called eba, which is a dense, smooth starch that you use to scoop the soup, and which has the particular genius of existing primarily to deliver more soup to your mouth as efficiently as possible, making it, in functional terms, an edible utensil that is also delicious in its own right. Gabro ate it in silence. Sif ate it in silence. Councilor Dren ate it in what began as controlled, professional silence, and then, around the 4th bite, became a different kind of silence. The kind where you have stopped performing composure and are simply experiencing something. She set down her back. She looked at me. I said nothing. I simply waited, with the patience of a being who has already been through this, who has already sat in this exact restaurant at this exact table and felt the precise recalibration of reality that was currently happening behind Councilor Dren's very dignified eyes. The sensory data, she said carefully, was accurate. Yes, I said. The biological response readings, also accurate. She was quiet for a moment. Then, with tremendous academic dignity, she said, I may have been somewhat dismissive of your preliminary assessment. You called it emotionally compromised. I did say that, yes. You also suggested I might benefit from recalibration leave. Councilor Dren straightened slightly. I maintain that recalibration leave is generally beneficial for field analysts. Mira, I called toward the kitchen. The councillor is ready for the next course. Mira appeared with something called fried plantains. Golden, soft, slightly caramelized at the edges. Sweet but not aggressively sweet, with a texture that exists in the precise overlap between firm and yielding that our biology, apparently, finds extraordinarily compelling. She set them down, said, These pair well with the pepper soup if you want to try them together, and then walked back into the kitchen, as though she had not just described a combination that Gabbro would later document as a bilateral sensory agreement that our species has no prior framework for. Councilor Dren tried the plantains. She tried them with the pepper soup. She put her spoon down very deliberately. She picked up her own datapad. She began typing. I leaned slightly to my left to read what she was writing, because I am professionally curious and also because I wanted to know whether I was about to be vindicated. The report read, Supplementary Assessment, Councilor Dren, Cycle 4422. Having conducted independent evaluation of human food substances on site, I am revising the preliminary assessment of analyst Vorrak 8, from emotionally compromised to empirically sound. She paused in her typing. Then she added, significantly empirically sound. Then she added, the plantains are particularly relevant to the broader cultural risk framework. Then she flagged the report as Priority Level 1, which is a designation reserved for potential species-wide impact events. Mira came out of the kitchen. She was carrying this time a large pot. She set it on the table with the easy confidence of someone who does this every day, which she does, and lifted the lid. Steam rose. The smell arrived approximately 1.5 seconds later, and it arrived the way a very large, very organized argument arrives, which is to say all at once from multiple directions, with total conviction. Oxtail stew, Mira said. It has been cooking for 6 hours. Sif said very quietly, 6 hours. Low and slow, Mira said. That is how you get it to this point. What point is this point? Sif asked. Mira looked at the pot with the expression of someone who has made something they are genuinely proud of, which is an expression that, I have learned, exists across many species, but somehow looks most complete on humans when they cook. The point, she said, where the meat stops being separate from the sauce. There was a brief silence around the table. That is either poetry, Torquul said, or a scientific description. Both, Mira said cheerfully, and served us each a portion. We ate the oxtail stew. Councilor Dren's report grew by approximately 400 words over the next 20 minutes. Gabbro, who had not spoken since the Egusi soup, turned to Sif and said, in the hushed tone one uses for significant announcements, I understand now. Sif nodded. They did not elaborate. They did not need to. Plivv, who was on his second helping, had at some point acquired an expression of deep personal peace, the kind my species typically only sees in beings who have resolved a long-standing philosophical conflict. He looked, genuinely, like a being who had found something he had not known he was looking for. I watched all of this. I took my notes. I did my job. And then Mira sat down across from me, which she had not done before, and folded her hands on the table and said, So, what does the report say? Officially? I asked. Any version you want to give me. I considered. I thought about the layers in the jollof rice. I thought about Torquul and his letter. I thought about Councilor Dren, 42 titles and absolute professional confidence, typing the words significantly empirically sound with the focused expression of a convert. I thought about Plivv and the chin-chin bowl and his remarkably accepting attitude toward his own defeat. I thought about the way this restaurant smelled when you walked in, and how that smell had in 11 days become something my sensory memory filed under significant. Officially, I said, the report will classify human food as a Category 1 cultural influence agent, which is the highest classification we have. It means that exposure to human food will, with near certainty, produce measurable and lasting changes in the cultural behaviors and preferences of any species that encounters it. We will recommend that all future diplomatic exchanges involving human representatives include a food interaction protocol, because frankly, any species that eats with humans before negotiating anything is going to come out of that experience considerably more favorable toward humans than they went in. Mira tilted her head slightly. Is that a problem? For the humans? No. For galactic power dynamics? Potentially significant. For my ability to file an objective report? Genuinely, yes, because I have eaten your food for 11 days, and I am aware that my objectivity is currently operating at reduced capacity. Mira smiled. Not the professional welcoming smile she used at the door, a quieter one. Reduced capacity. How? I find myself, when writing the neutral sections of the report, repeatedly wanting to add qualifiers. Things like, yes, but the Egusi soup. Or, this is technically accurate, however, the oxtail stew. The stew is affecting my sentence structures, and I do not fully know how to address that in a methodological sense. Mira laughed, full and warm, the kind of laugh that humans produce when they are surprised by something into genuine amusement rather than performed amusement, and which sounds, to my species' auditory processing, like something between music and weather. You know what I think? She said. I suspect you are going to tell me, I said. I think the report is fine. I think you did your job. And I think the reason your sentence structures have qualifiers is not because your objectivity failed. It is because objectivity is not the same as accuracy. And sometimes the accurate thing to say is, yes, but the Egusi soup. I looked at her. She looked back. I picked up my datapad. I found the section of the report labeled Conclusion and Recommendations. I had written it the night before with painstaking, deliberate neutrality, and it read, in my professional estimation, correctly but coldly. It said all the right things with none of the right weight. I deleted the final paragraph. I typed, in its place, the following. Conclusion. Human food is not simply a cultural risk. It is a cultural argument made through flavor, heat, patience, and the deliberate layering of experience into something that exceeds the sum of its ingredients. Any species that encounters it will be changed by it. This is not a warning. This is an observation, filed with full academic integrity and the acknowledgement that integrity, in this case, requires honesty, and honesty requires saying the following. In 11 days on a small human street, at a restaurant called Osei's Table, this analyst's team of 7 trained professionals was collectively and individually confronted with the possibility that food is not fuel, that it is perhaps something closer to a language, and that humans speak it fluently, loudly, generously, and without any apparent awareness of how extraordinary that is. Recommendation: do not send analysts to study human food unless you are prepared for them to return as different analysts. Send them anyway. It is worth it. I looked at what I had written. Mira read it over my shoulder, and this time I did not mind. That, she said quietly, is a good report. It is going to cause significant problems at the council, I said. Probably, she agreed. Councilor Dren will likely request I take recalibration leave after all. Will you go? I thought about it. I thought about my 14 titles and my field record, and my professional reputation, and the extraordinary dignity with which I had entered this restaurant 11 days ago, fully intending to document, assess and depart. I looked at the kitchen, where something was already simmering for tomorrow, because Mira cooked the way some beings breathe, constantly and without thinking about stopping. I will go, I said, after I have tried the thing you mentioned this morning, the one you called jerk chicken. Mira stood up, still smiling, and moved back toward the kitchen. Give me 40 minutes, she said. I settled back in my chair. I opened a fresh page in my datapad, because 40 minutes with nothing to do is 40 minutes of documentation, and I am, despite everything, still a professional. I began typing. Outside, on the narrow human street, the trees in the square holes in the ground moved slightly in the wind. The restaurant was warm. The sounds from the kitchen were deliberate and rhythmic, and occasionally accompanied by Mira humming something low and tuneful that I did not recognize, but my auditory sensors logged anyway, quietly, without being asked. The smell arrived before the food did. It always does. I kept typing and I noted, in the margin of the new page, in a small bracket that would probably be edited out before the official submission, Day 12. Still here. Do not regret it.